Our morning keynote is George Dix. And George and I have been friends for a long, long time, and I can never get enough of hearing him speak about the things that he knows a lot about and how he's able to present it in a way that you can really understand and use the information. George is the clinic lead of geriatric psychiatry services at Harborview Mental Health and Addiction Services. George is a graduate of Georgia Regents University and has practiced for 30 years as a state-certified geriatric mental health specialist and a minority mental health specialist for African Americans. George is a trainer for DSHS and the University of Washington. For the past 25 years, he has also served as a faculty member at Edmonds Community College in the Social Health Services Department. Come on up, George, and tell us what you know.
First of all, it's always an honor to be invited to share information and to meet with you all this morning. So thank you all for asking me to join you. I always, again, feel such a strong obligation to be clear about what our agenda is today. I want to really focus on you. I want you to know that today is about you as a caregiver. This is Veterans Day weekend. And so I want to first of all thank all of you men and women who served in the armed forces, and thank you for your service and devotion to the country. I'm an Army brat. That's one of my tribes. And so I know what it is to be a family member of someone who serves active duty military. So I want to thank you too for those who stand and wait. They too serve. And it's so essential to the life of men in the military, men and women in the military, to have someone back at home who they can count on and who keeps the home fires burning. So I want to honor my mother and all the women and husbands these days who support the military. I want to thank you all too who are caregivers. You serve so much and in so many ways that go unacknowledged every day, that go unhonored. Well, I know how much work you do. I work in that world. As Margaret mentioned, my job is the lead at Harborview Geropsych Service in the psychiatric department. Those of you who go to Harborview, you know there's no place like it. And thank goodness, that's right. It's a place I've spent 35 years at, and you get to be a Harborview person. It's slightly manic kind of thing. Anyway, but it works for us. And again, I'd like to honor the people who work there and the university, and because we serve the community, the most challenged people, the most diverse population. We are the largest minority service provider. So anyway, I want to remind you of that. And also, all you guys who have insurance, come to Harborview too, please. Okay. Again, I want to talk about our theme today, which is love, resiliency, and hope. Let me just start out with love. You guys know what love is. Well, I don't know. I like to think that love is a verb, okay? I know that love is these feelings that we have for the people in our lives, but I know feelings are very mixed and varied. So love is the action, that is, you do in spite of the challenges that are put in front of you. So again, today is about you. Over years past, when I participated in this conference, I focused on behavioral management strategies, people telling me about problems they're having with their loved ones, and let's try to figure out how to best intervene and that sort of thing. That's an appropriate way to help a caregiver. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. And that's not what I'm going to present today. You need to take care of yourself. You are aging as well. You will have, as we do in our communities, so when I say our communities, I'm talking about a variety of situations. There is our economic community. Many of us live in marginal economic situations. And those things generate stress. We see what's happening with housing in Seattle. We see what's happening in general with displacement and the loss of community. All of these things, in addition to our caregiving responsibilities, contribute to stress. I don't know if any of you watch TV. I don't know if any of you watch TV news. Okay? There's a lot of energy out there in the world, and a lot of it's negative, and there's no way for us to really block those things out effectively. And so there's all this cumulative stress, and we're talking about populations, African American community, all the minority communities actually, LGBTQ community. I want to be real clear that there are other disparate organizations or groups of people, and that we have mutual needs and mutual challenges, and it's really important that we establish a sense of alliance with our whole community, invite everyone in to the table. So caregiving is this complex task that takes a lot of our time. It's based on love because my parents took care of me when I was a little boy. That's called reciprocity. That's what is a norm in many families. But you and I know that that norm doesn't get distributed equally or evenly. So again, let me thank you who are the primary, perhaps exclusive caregivers of your loved one. And I'm going to ask you to think about that. Love is a sense of beneficence. That is, I see this person. I have empathy, that capacity to feel for others, the capacity to walk in another person's shoes, the capacity to anticipate what would I do if I were in that situation. And I hear stories all the time about strangers, unfamiliar people who reach out and offer support, financial support, food, well-being, comfort, spiritual care to people in need. That's a wonderful form of love. So I just want to really be clear that I appreciate this wonderful feeling that we have, and I want us to now think about hope. Hope. What is hope with the population of the folks that you work with? So do I think that mom's Alzheimer's is going to go away? That's not likely to happen. Do I think that whatever extreme situation that we're dealing with is going to resolve itself just on its own? No, that's not going to happen. So hope is our effort to be positive, to anticipate the future. The hope is about the future. When I think about the challenges that we have as caregivers in this field, hope is about research that is being done by organizations that I'm involved with, Margaret's involved with, many of you at the University of Washington Health Promotion Research Center, where we're actually trying to figure out how not to get Alzheimer's, how not to get the many diseases, and again, the diseases, the chronic illnesses that especially afflict minority communities of all sorts. You've heard about this term called disparities. Disparities, that is, what is different about the services available, the services utilized by, again, minority and or otherwise disenfranchised communities versus mainstream communities, and how are those resources distributed? How is treatment determined? So as a research person, in that capacity, I want to make sure that you all know there is hope for the future around dementia, Alzheimer's, hypertension. All of these things are being better understood. So we need to support research. We need to participate. You know that one of the problems with medications and, again, strategies for intervention is that particularly minority communities don't participate in research. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. So what's the magic word? Tuskegee? Yeah, right. That's the magic word. That's the magic word. But there's many other examples in each of our lives of perhaps negative encounters with the mainstream. And what I would ask you to do is, that's the past. Let's think about now. I'm very skeptical about being invited into a research project, but I have participated in many of them, and I will continue to, because that is part of the way that I provide care to my community. So the constituents of care are not always, again, simply the person with some disability or some challenging behaviors. It is you and I. We're aging. We're continuing to grow. We need to continue to adapt to the changes and challenges that come into our lives. And you guys who are caregivers are actually doing that. You know, you are figuring things out, you spend time, you commit your resources, your spirit, your health and well-being are all the things that make caregiving a viable situation and that benefit the person that you love. So I want you to think about what makes you hopeful? What do you look forward to? Again, I want you to think about yourself today more than about the other people that you have to take care of. Because I'm a carer. I have a huge caseload of people as a professional. I'm a family member. I have young people in my life who are struggling in their 20s. Gosh, I'm so glad I'm not in my 20s anymore. Wow, God bless you all who are still going through that. You'll get through it, I hope, yeah. And you will get through it, you will get through it. Look around you, everybody else, we all made it through that. But that's real in a world that is more challenging to them. I live in a variety of communities. I see new pressure on particularly the sexual minority community vis-a-vis political factors, vis-a-vis reduction of resources. Again, the challenges that we all have to survival are further more complicated when you add these other social challenges to your life. So I just want us to all be in mind that there are many of us caring for many people. Think about, again, I think most of us are here thinking about dementia, but I want you to think about the kids. I got 5-year-olds in my life, okay? And 5-year-olds who are struggling, 5-year-olds who are watching how I treat grandma too. So remember, you are a role model for the young people in your life. You're a role model for those 20-year-olds who are struggling. You're a role model for those 40-year-olds who are approaching that time in life when I'm thinking about the future and I have enough information to sort of understand who I am now. And that is, you got to go around the block enough times to sort of get a sense of who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are. And that's a challenge in midlife. So I want to encourage you to, again, today, focus on your own health. So I have a little challenge for you. Take a couple of minutes, and I'd like you to look at the people at your table, and I would like you to have a brief discussion, 5 minutes. What have I done to take care of myself this week? What have I done to take care of myself? How have I laughed this week? Okay, so let's take 5 minutes and do that. Please talk among yourselves, and then we'll come back. That's right, get to know your table mate. So we've got about a minute, and I'm going to ask you to report from your table. So go ahead and summarize. Okie doke. I hope that, there's a lot of talking, so I hope that means you guys are doing something. I hope that means that you've been busy taking care of yourselves. So let me ask the table way in the back over there. Can someone from that table tell us what you guys talked about? Oh, yeah, thank you. So who was healthy back there? Tell me. We all are. That's what I want to hear. Okay. Share the examples.
Okay. So we talked about doing things.
Cynthia.
Hey there, George. How are you? We talked about doing things that will make us happy, spending time by ourselves. Some people don't understand that caregiving, that we're all caregivers, but we do things they don't think make sense to them, but it makes sense to us.
I love that, spending time by myself. Okay. Don't we all need a break? Okay. Try this table.
We came here.
Okay. I hope that this is going to be that kind of day for you. Thank you.
We did yoga.
Yes.
We dated.
Okay.
We checked into a room.
Okay.
We focused on ourselves. We
Okay.
prayed and did meditation.
Yes.
We refused to respond to a crisis while we were here.
Oh, excellent.
And we came
You
here to
mean
find
you-
solutions.
So wonderful. You know what I heard in that? It doesn't all have to be on me, which is that's really important, because faulty thinking about excessive responsibility is a good road to burnout. Thank you for saying that. Thank you very much. Let's try these guys.
Our theme was exercising, taking that time to make sure that we exercise every day.
So exercise, how do you find the time?
I actually get up early in the morning and do it because nobody's bothering me, and I meditate as I do the elliptic stepper.
Okay, so we know it is well known. Excuse me. You want to know the fountain of youth? They just identified it. You want to resist the onset of dementia yourself? You need to get those veins cleaned out, which means you got to get that blood flowing right. You got to burn up all those bad chemicals that are sadness, worry, depression, a sense of always being under pressure is making in our brains. That self-critical self-talk that we do, we need to get all of that out. And it helps exercise burns a lot of those chemicals up, plus strengthens us. What else was going on over there? Okay, please.
Okay. Who's talking?
Come on, be brave.
So a lot of what was talked about here was exercising, keeping track of steps, to mirror what the first table said, or the second table said, was being here. I actually stepped out and went to dinner last night. I've had a manicure and a pedicure.
Excellent, 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 excellent.
And yeah, just being here by myself, no grandkids, no husband, no work. Yeah. You're rested, huh?
Thank you. Again, we need our own time, don't we? Okay. We need time with our own thoughts, please.
Okay, here I am. We touched on a lot of the things that were already mentioned, and I think at the top of the list was the being here part.
Excellent.
But also the exercise, the deep breathing, taking some time in the morning to, when you get up, to just take a minute, meditate, and take some breaths before you get out the door. And walking is always a really great exercise.
Walking, excellent. And you're saying get centered. That's kind of an old term from the 70s and 60s, folks, is get centered. And I think, again, today we might use the term being mindful. Have you heard that jargon thrown around? It simply means being self-aware, taking the time to concentrate, to clear all those distractions that we have. Try to control or stop some of that constant dialogue that's going on in your head. Like when I'm up at 4 o'clock this morning saying, why am I thinking about all of this, right? I can't do anything about it now. Thank you. There's a hand back there that's been really wanting to.
Hi, my name is Gail Johnson. I just lost my mom.
I'm sorry,
October
Gail.
8th. We took care of my mother. My sister and I took care of her in her home. She had dementia and she was bedridden for 4 years. But what I found is that I made sure that I meditated. That was a huge thing because that just relaxes your body. But I meditated, I went to massage, and I also did Reiki. I do energy healing myself, and so I did Reiki every month. So that helped to balance my energy, to keep me rejuvenated and to keep my energy in balance, which is was huge for me. And making sure I was at least walking a couple times a week.
How did that enhance your care of your father?
My mother?
Mother, excuse me. Yeah.
It made me more in tune with Mom. One of the things that we did is that we made sure that my sister also does Reiki. So when my mom was having sundowners or anything like that, we would do the Reiki on her. And by doing Reiki, that calmed her system down, and she eventually had very few episodes of sundowning. And then also we had a lot of crystals and a lot of healing plants around her, so very alternative type things as well. And then also using some essential oils like lavender to calm the system. So making sure we integrated a variety of different things to keep her comfortable and calm. But by doing that, she enjoyed music, and even though she had dementia, you could still talk to her. She still was Mom in a lot of ways, and she never forgot us.
You said, I'm going to ask you two things. One, what is Reiki for the group who don't know?
Okay. So Reiki is energy healing. So what it was the Japanese came out of Japan, and they believe, this is 2,000 years ago, they believe that when, if you are ill, mentally, physically, having pain, any of those things, it's because your spiritual pathways are blocked. And we all have what we call chakras, energy centers in our body, and they all are associated with emotions and those type of things. When that energy is blocked, you can get sick. And so what Reiki does is Reiki helps, the practitioner helps people to move their energy, clear those pathways so that energy can flow so that your body can heal.
Thank you. Again, what was the most benefit that the music? What kind of music did you use?
The music, well, Mom loved all music, but we also definitely played a lot of the music of her generation.
So critical?
Right.
That's right. And so I know that I can go into any nursing facility, any adult family home assisted living facility where older adults of a certain cohort live, and I can start, Jesus loves me, yes,
right.
I know.
Right.
And that's in there. What you've also talking about is when people have difficulty speaking and conveying information that way, that part of your brain that deals with music is still maybe very functional and is a way to connect.
Right.
in a way that is mutually beneficial and gratifying.
Right.
And I think maybe start thinking about this overlap. How can what we do be mutually beneficial that you can actually enjoy?
Yeah, we both
Enjoy.
all three of us would sit around and just
That's right.
listen to music and sing and.
And you know, you can play that over again. It's kind of like, again, you know, you've got the kid at home that's seen The Little Mermaid 400 times, you know, but but you can do that with mom too.
Yeah.
And I would ask you to, again, part of our love for our people is knowing their histories and bringing that history into play. Who were they? I'm from Georgia as a little kid. I grew up in Augusta, parts in Augusta, Georgia. I'm going to, if I develop dementia, particularly Alzheimer's type, I'm going to regress into those kinds of attitudes and thinking and fears and concerns and joys as well. So find out what mom's and dad's history was and try to implement that. What was this table's how have you guys, I know you guys are hard workers every day, so tell me, how did you answer that question?
Thank you. We have a great table here. Some of us went out and walked, took the day off of work yesterday. They did call in, right? Took the day off. One of them drank 8 ounces of water every day.
Ooh, okay.
Yes. You want to know who that is?
No.
Oh, 64 ounces.
Why is that important?
Pretty much 5 gallons.
Why is that important? Why is that important that you drank all that water yesterday?
Cleansing. And
So this is back to getting all those crappy chemicals out of your system. It's also making all this other stuff down here work. Right. It also keeps the brain kind of juicy, you know, and you want that. You want all of that stuff. And the reason I say that is one of the major, if not the number one ER diagnosis for seniors is dehydration. So again, if your loved one, the person you're caring for, is developing slowly over time these challenging behaviors, you might want to look at that as a feature. What else?
There were a couple more. Eating right, cutting out carbs. Was that just this week? Cutting out the carbs. And laughter, got a massage, and exercise.
It's
so
so
that's
critical.
This whole table here.
Thank you. Thank you. What about you guys? We're going to go to all of you guys. You guys all did something. Next table there. Anybody who hasn't done, yeah, what'd you guys decide?
Okay. All right, first of all, thank you for those folks that put this together. This has already been enlightening for me in the first couple of minutes. Our group, or our table, talked about exercise, mirrored a lot of the things that have already been spoken, but the epiphany that I had was that you need to take care of yourself. And so I take care of my wife, and excuse me. One of the things that everyone said is that, you know, the caregiver often goes before the person that they're caring for.
That's right.
So that's something that I've already said I got to work on. So thank you for that.
Sacrificing yourself is not what your loved one wants, and it is not appropriate. I want to, when I give care, when I'm involved with the loved ones in my life, I want to feel good about what I'm doing, as opposed to when I get that phone call about money, and I feel irritated, you know, about that. And it takes me a while to work my way around to rationalizing why I am going to actually send them the money, okay? And so I just want to tell you that we all do that, okay? And I don't want... especially folks who have cognitive challenges. They don't know how to necessarily understand the world independently. So this thing right here is what folks with dementia are looking at to know how to feel. So, and also your body language, if I can't get language, all of us were tuned, think about even as little kids, to try and figure out what this person was there for, what their agenda is. And you often wonder, why is there resistance to care? Part of it is because we're not being conscious of how we're presenting ourselves. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
So again, when we approach tasks with our love, we need to be as neutral as we can, or positive, not irritable, not thinking about something else while I'm trying to do something with mom or dad or the youngster that's in my life. And we live in a culture that demands all these distractions all the time, and I just want to, that's part of what I'm saying to you today, is learn to get away from that. Establish a healthy space in your world and your life. For those of us in this field, structure is really critical to making sure that you do this stuff every day, okay? You owe it to yourself. This gentleman, I appreciate what you say, because we all have seen this. When the mask drops down in the airplane, yours first, because you will not be able to help the other person if you too are drowning or starving or suffocating. And you won't like them. And you'll be glad when they're gone, and then you'll feel bad about that. So that's all unnecessary. Let me put it that way. All of that's unnecessary. So recognize your limitations. Recognize that your loved one needs more than you. And that, as I'm going to keep repeating, there's a little kid watching, Mom, how you treat grandma. There's a 20-year-old trying to sort out what it means to be older, what it means to be an adult now, what responsibilities do I take on? Because the world offers us, let me put it this way, everything can be made into a business in America. Okay, we're all for sale all the time, and think about that. And I want you to have an intimate, caring relationship that's rewarding for you, that serves your mother and father, and that it demonstrates, here's the very important construct, resilience. So, I know that the communities that I've referenced this morning, all the minority communities, in fact, all the communities, the LGBTQ trans community, all the ethnic groups, we are survivors. We are all survivors, not of just our lifetimes, but of generations of struggle. We have inherited a legacy of strength and survivorship, and that's what I want you to be in touch with today and honor, is that you come from a resilient society. You come from a resilient tribe. You come from a resilient community. Resilience is having dealt with challenges and being able to respond in a hopeful, productive manner, to not be overwhelmed by the challenges of life. And that's why we're all here, is because we haven't been overwhelmed, that we have learned to adapt. And that, you know, at 67, I realized it's not going to stop. No. And that what we've learned in our life, it's always needed. It's always needed. Ever more. Life doesn't get a lot easier, excuse me, as a 68-year-old in a month. And just different changes. Well, I'm counting on it in a month, let's put it that way. But I know tomorrow is not promised to any of us. That's right. So I don't want to preach, so anyway. But I want us to be every day. It's taken a long time to appreciate the vitality of life, to not always be preoccupied with the struggle of day-to-day life. So again, behaviors of love are the task we do, the positive energy we bring, the music, spirit, and community, you know, hook people up with their old friends. I know there are not a lot of old friends sometimes. I'm having that experience now. I went to Molson, Washington a month ago and spread the ashes of my dearest friend in life, who I expected to spread mine. You know, and the loss of my doc of 35 years. Do you know what it's like to lose people who know you? That you can't imagine what it's like to try and start over. So again, part of our responsibility to the young people in our lives is to make that connection between what I know about my grandmother who is in decline and them. I share what are the patterns that I've noticed, and because we're all living older now, most of us, I knew my great-grandparents. I knew my grandparents, and now I see 2 generations below me, and I see the patterns repeating themselves over and over and over and over again. And that's the knowledge I hope to convey to young people by saying, your aunt went through this, you'll get through this. Or as I like to say to my nieces and nephews, it ain't picking cotton. So just to remind you that life can be a lot tougher than it is, okay? A lot tougher than it is. So I honor their histories. Again, in these times, hope is necessary, but I see it everywhere. That turnout last Tuesday, whichever side you were on, it was a good thing. People are awake. They're engaged. Okay, so this is your chance to talk with people. So I do have hope for the future. Young people, I definitely see a positive efforts at a productive and good future. So I love those people, and I want us to honor young people and bring them into our existence. I'm going to play now. I'm going to share. So again, like I said, resilience is what this is about, and this is about you. And you and I are all aging, and we need to age in a healthy manner. And so I'm going to share with you a video that's focused on well-being and aging well, because that's how we're going to be around, first of all, to be role models for young people, to share our information, what we've learned. You know, again, back to those 20-year-olds, I remember when I was 20, I didn't want to be bothered with people my age at all. You know, 20-year-olds, when I was a 20-year-old, let me talk about me. I don't want to generalize about other people. But my interests were limited, let me put it that way. Mostly about getting a good job and having a good time of however one defines that, right? To making relationships, being with friends, you know, having new experiences. Think about it. That's what you do in your 20s. Everything's new. All the problems of life are new. And so, but I'm in my 60s now, and I can reflect on those experiences. And again, right now, what I want to do is wait for those youngsters to call me, besides for money. And so I'm saying now, why don't you talk to me before you make that decision? You know, before you go down there. But I know, but that's, you know, we all have to go through all of that stuff ourselves. So the video that I'm going to share with you today is really focused on you doing what enhances your health and your mental well-being. Mental health is not the absence of mental illness. It is more than that. It is well-being. It is having a sense of contentment in life. It is being able to have fun. Well, you know, we all got a favorite TV show. I have to watch that. I set some time aside for that. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I have community. I'm so fortunate to belong to many communities. Well, your loved one has a community. They need to be in community. There are wonderful resources outside this door, whether they're adult day programs, etc. Senior centers? Yes, of course. So we put a lot of money into these things. We want you to use them, and you need to use them in order for them to continue to be viable. And even though at a certain age I may not think I'm going to need or want to go to the senior center, well, go anyway. Take your loved one with you. How many times I've had the wonderful experience as a clinician of taking someone who hasn't. So this is what happens. Bernice had taken care of Ralph for a good 15 years, and she became isolated. When Ralph died, she was alone. She had lost connection with her. That's a common story. That's not unusual. But I remember taking Bernice that day. She became a client of mine for depression, which happens when you become isolated and overstressed and you're not taking care of yourself, right? And I took her to the Central Area Senior Center. It was unbelievable what happened. I was in tears. Half the people were in there and were in tears because they hadn't seen Bernice in 20 years. And they had all thought she had died, you know? And then, yeah, that happens all the time. It's not rare at all. So please utilize that. Just her going there was so positive to energize her. It was such a relief for the community to see that this elder that they valued had not been lost. It was good for them to see me with her and wonder what I was doing and then learn about the program and maybe that they could utilize that service as well. Aging and Disability Services has wonderful support programs for community caregivers, for paid caregivers, for all kinds of situations and circumstances that we know seniors will have to be challenged by. Use it. You paid for it. You paid your taxes, you know. That's what it's for. It's not welfare. And so again, for those of us in communities that have suffered stigma over time, you have to deal with that. Let that stuff go. You are a taxpayer. These services were designed for the community, okay? Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, I want to play this and then have a few minutes for your questions. But again, this is about you. And this is going to be a prescription for your healthy, successful aging.
One needs to always think about the future and longevity.
Exercising is very important because it helps keep the body healthy, and it can actually prevent diseases such as diabetes and chronic kidney disease.
The bones do lose bone density as we age, and over the years that can add up.
If a person is beginning to decline physically, they're often beginning to decline mentally as well.
We may wish to be really quick and to remember everything that crosses our field of vision, but hardly anybody is able to do it at 50. How come?
Baby boomers have a reputation as the first generation engaged in active denial of their aging process. According to a recent article in Newsweek, boomers believe they'll die before they ever become old, and they project a lifespan of close to 100. Such optimism needs to be supported by substantial changes in lifestyle and attitude. Aging well, emotionally, physically, and mentally, is becoming personally meaningful to this group hovering at the brink of 60, convinced they will stay forever young. Hello, I'm Ron Reagan. Like many of you, I've experienced the aging process through parents, grandparents, other family members. If we're lucky, we'll all get to experience this process directly. But whether 36 or 86, the art of aging as a sociological, physical phenomenon can be influenced by groundbreaking research with profound implications.
It's been said that in about 20 years, nearly 20% of our population is going to be over 65. That's a large block of folks. And that would be the baby boomer bulge, if you will.
So what we're seeing is large numbers of people living to unheard of old age, and because of that, we've been able to study that process in the last 20, 30 years in ways that it was never studied in the past, and it's also more relevant because there's so many more people. But what we haven't done is figured out a way to build our lifestyles and build our society around a more active approach to aging. And so the sort of active approach, which realizes the mind and the body are connected and both can benefit from that sort of active lifestyle, is today's big message. And it's a new message because we didn't know this a few years ago.
What are the keys to successful aging? How does this new generation of senior citizens prepare for their next decades? First, a large proportion of this burgeoning demographic may need some reality checks. They must clearly evaluate their current state of health and face what they might expect if they don't make some significant changes in their diet and daily habits.
The most recent surveys are showing that we're getting about half of the calcium that we should. And the average American is certainly not getting enough exercise. Too many of us sit around and don't even get up and walk to the store or walk around the block.
Lack of exercise is often accompanied by poor eating habits. Fast foods loaded in calories, lacking in nutritive value, have often been the mainstay of a generation that now needs to understand the components of a well-balanced diet.
So a diet that has several servings of fruits and vegetables, and a diet that has certain grains, and a diet that's probably less than 30% fat total. The United States is going through this obesity epidemic, and it's probably within the last 10 years we've been much more conscious of it as a nation, and it's starting in younger ages. So as we age, we tend not to exercise as much as we used to, and so it's this onset of obesity that probably predisposes people to developing diabetes and hypertension and other diseases that just get worse as time progresses. And if people can lose weight, they can actually sort of prevent things such as diabetes and hypertension.
When you're about 85, half of the women have osteoporosis and half of them don't. In men, that curve starts to go up about 10 years later. So that means if we're looking at men between 80 and 90, we have the same rate of fractures as women between 70 and 80. When your bone is in balance, you fill it up as much as you dissolve away. But when you're not in balance, you can dissolve the bone and then not fill it up quite so much, and so you lose a little bit. And over the years, we lose 1 or 2%, and that can add up to almost 50% of your bone by the time you're really quite elderly. The bones do lose bone density as we age. Even when you're trying to do all the things to prevent osteoporosis.
Tuck one knee to the inside and behind the supporting knee and raise the foot up for hamstring curls.
Osteoporosis is a disease where your bones are thin, and so they're more likely to break. And you don't know any problems unless you get a fracture, and then the fracture is very painful. A lot of people forget that the bone is really very active. And even doctors, they think of it as just being a structure, like the leg on a table. But the bone is always remodeling itself and filling in the cracks, making new bone. So it's very alive and active. And if we didn't have that, then our bones would eventually get a lot of little cracks and just crumble.
Clearly, awareness of the likelihood of a reduction in bone density should be on the radar of an aging population. Prevention and strengthening are part of that reality check.
The kind of exercise that is the strongest for the bone is what we call impact. We also call it weight bearing. And that's because you can have a sudden shift in the fluid inside your bones, and the cells can detect that as a necessary reason to make new bone.
The bones feel the impact, your body, from the top of your spine all the way down to your ankles. So the impact itself is what encourages bone growth and bone health. The building of the bone with the weight-bearing exercise really does allow your body to continue growing bone and muscle to overcome what you're losing.
Remember, when a bone is stressed through physical activity and muscle movement, it becomes stronger. Weight-bearing exercises are key to good bone health. Walking, running, tennis, and dance aerobics qualify in that category. Cycling, swimming, and kayaking are good for your overall health, but aren't weight-bearing.
What a nice day to walk. As adults, exercise where you're walking is sensed by your bone cells, and they will make your bones stronger. So that's probably the most important thing that we can all do. And the other important thing is a good diet, and that means enough calcium and also enough protein and enough calories that we're not really thin. So altogether, you need to have about 1,200 milligrams of calcium a day. That would be the same as 4 glasses of milk.
Did you do it?
Can I do it? Yes, I can. One needs to always think about the future and longevity. And what I've learned over the years is that the stepping stones to good health for a long time, and even when I'm done dancing, is through the nutrition and through the way I eat and how I eat. So for my bones and my muscles, I really try to eat a lot of calcium.
And it's perfectly fine to take supplements. Once it's in your stomach, your body doesn't care whether it came from a glass of milk or a calcium supplement. Yogurt is a very good source because a lot of older people have lactose deficiency. And if they drink milk or eat cheese, they have intestinal gas and bloating. But yogurt does not have any lactose because the bacteria have eaten it up. And so people can eat yogurt when they can't drink milk.
What would you guess is the optimal amount of calcium an average person needs each day? 1,200 milligrams. Good sources are cheese, yogurt, Viactive chews, and some dark green leafy vegetables. Ice cream and lattes are favorite choices, but watch the fat content. Even sardines are great for calcium, but you have to eat the bones.
5, 6.
Good nutrition is a starting point for healthy aging and stronger bones, but it has to be paired with smart and effective exercise.
Exercising is very important because it helps keep the body healthy, and it can actually prevent diseases such as diabetes and chronic kidney disease.
One of the things that we find in our studies of exercise is there's a huge dropout rate, and about half of the people don't even keep their exercise up for 1 year. So to me, the most important thing of an exercise is do one that you'll do forever. Whether that's walking, dancing, hiking, something you can always do for years and years.
Walking is healthful to your legs, and I got rheumatism and arthritis combined, and when I walk, it helps, it goes away. And I just sort of going to outsmart a whole pile of people and live as long as I can, so I'm going to walk.
What we know now is that it's very likely that habitual exercise also slows the rate of decline in age-related memory loss, for example, and slows the rate at which people might lapse into a disease like Alzheimer's disease.
Now just deep breathing exercise, just breathe in.
Just a modest amount of exercise in old age, 3 times per week, 15 minutes at least, seems to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease by 30 to 40%, which is quite substantial. And if you think about that for a minute, this disease happens late in life, so if you reduce the rate for 5 or 6 years, the chances are very good that the person may not be around to get the disease eventually.
Exercise has been proven to have many benefits, some in surprising areas like maintaining mental sharpness. The primary benefits of exercise are in prevention of heart disease, some forms of cancer, non-insulin dependent diabetes, obesity, weakened immune system, and regular exercise can also contribute to a sense of well-being.
So I'm going to pause it here, and we have a limited amount of time. So I want to ask you to go to the internet. This is under YouTube. You know, everything's under YouTube. I've recently discovered that, by the way. Wow. Music. Oh man, it's taken over my the yard on these was warm evenings. So there's everything on there. Also, I want to say about behavioral management. Go in there and put in and ask about the behaviors that you're concerned about. We're going to wrap up this portion of the morning, but are there questions about well-being, or are there something that you would like to specifically raise? Yes. Can you put too much stress on the bones? You see that it's making more bones. So you're getting stronger. Again, that's why I played this, because I want you to be healthy. I mean, and I don't think most of us know these little tricks and the consequences, which are not insignificant. They're really important things. So please, I love it that it's said in our community here in Seattle. I hope some of you recognize this not Central Area, but Southeast Senior Center. And the other one was famous North Shore Senior Center. I always say world famous North Shore Senior Center. So these are resources in our community. I want you to get out there. Again, on Capitol Hill, there's now a new LGBTQ Gen Pride Senior Center that's just developed, that's in the process of being developed. I know we're doing our darndest to keep Central Area Senior Center alive and well. Yeah. So you guys get out there and join. Yeah, right. And write your city councilman, because particularly I think a Central Area that has a long legacy with the people that we're talking about that you care for. Again, I've gone there over 30 years, back when Warren Littlejohn was there, et cetera, and I love those people, and that's how I became a part of this community, is actually through the Central Area Senior Center. So I want to encourage you all to take care of yourselves, to love yourselves, because that's how you're going to be the best love objects for the people that we're talking about, who need our love, support, and energy, and it's got to be positive. And I want you to have a sense of reward and fulfillment when that task is done. So thank you all this morning for your attention, and I hope this is somehow being useful to you, and I hope that you will continue to talk about how to care for yourselves. So have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
I am delighted to be here to share. And I don't feel quite as prepared as I would like to feel, but I'm telling you this because it's better for me to just get it out and say it. I lost a dear friend who was buried Monday, and so I helped his wife the last couple of weeks prepare and make all the burial arrangements, and I just walked with her day by day leading up to his funeral and then his burial. It was my pleasure and honor to do that for her. But it meant I didn't give as much time to preparation for what I would say today. And I mention that because that's the way it is as caregivers. Things happen, and you have a plan, and it doesn't always go the way you expect it to go. That's just part of being a caregiver, and it requires us to make an adjustment and keep going. And that's the way life is, really. So I prepared my nice little presentation, printed it off, and I had 2 page 3s and no page 4. But I did do one good thing. I emailed the presentation to myself. So I will open up my little phone at one point, make sure I didn't forget all my points, and I will try to cover the most important things. So I'll give you a little bit of history about what it's been like as a caregiver, and then I'll talk about some of the challenges, and then I will talk about some of the things that helped me make it through and are still helping me make it through at this point. So my husband, David, in his mid-50s, began to show signs of forgetfulness, and he knew it was happening, and I knew it was happening because his mother passed away from Alzheimer's. And he knew the signs. It's in their family. Her 2 siblings also had it. All 3 of them were in the same nursing home, 2 at the same time. His sister, who's my age now, also has it. He has 3 other siblings, so it's strong in his family, so he knew the signs. And we could tell that it was happening, but we didn't always talk about it. There's a lot of fear associated with that. He was going for mental health counseling for depression that I think probably developed because he could see the changes happening actually long before he actually was diagnosed. Because as we know, the brain starts to change years before you ever see signs of dementia, and I think it scared him. So it was in about 11 years ago, around this time of year, that we began to see the first signs that he was being forgetful. And once I was sure there was a problem, like there was an incident that happened that I said, okay, this is it. We need to do something. And so we went, met with his doctor, talked about it. That was probably in 2010. Even though it started in 2007, he still went ahead and continued working, doing the things that he was doing. In 2010, we went to visit the doctor, and the doctor said, yes, I think this is Alzheimer's, and he referred us to the Alzheimer's Association. And so that started us on a new journey, and I went and met with Anita Sousa at the Alzheimer's Association. She connected me with a social worker, Chris Johnson. He checked in with me every month. He gave me resources, and I did everything I could do to get connected to every agency and organization so that I could learn what I could about this disease, find out what resources were available, because I knew I needed help. And my manager, who's a social worker by profession, said to me when I told her, I think David may have dementia. She said to me, Daphne, if he has dementia, you are going to need help. Don't try to do this by yourself. It's too much. And so I listened to the voices of people who had experience with this, that knew, and tried to be wise and follow what they were saying. So in early January 2011, David had to go out on disability and was no longer able to work. But he was still able to do a lot of things and was able to be home alone. And so for the next year or so, he was home. In 2012, I realized I could no longer leave him at home, so I retired from working as a family support worker. I also ended up having hip replacement surgery that same month. So it wasn't an ideal time to be trying to heal from that. That's why I'm still walking with a cane. It never, I'm one of those 1% where the hip replacement didn't work so well. We got a formal diagnosis in 2012 that it in fact was Alzheimer's, and we went from there. In 2013, he began to not know who I was all the time, and that was an interesting experience. It's kind of a shock when it happens, and but you deal with it and you keep moving. In April 2013, I started getting him enrolled in adult day health activities. So he was enrolled at Full Life Care and 2 or 3 days a week, and Elderwise 1 day a week. Those programs were wonderful for David. It kept him occupied, he made friends, he felt useful because he was a musician. He would play his guitar at Full Life and sing and lead groups, and he thought he was going there to help, the other people. And so you let that thought be what he's thinking, because they need to still feel useful. They still need to live life. Some of the challenges were losing this person that is my husband and my friend and the love of my life, and watching him slowly lose his abilities and capabilities. That's a huge, obvious challenge. One of the other big challenges became his wandering. He would walk out of the house. I remember the first time that happened, we'd been watching TV. I woke up to the phone ringing at 2 o'clock to him telling me he's out and he doesn't know where he is. And he was walking down Martin Luther King Boulevard on a Friday night with a hoodie on by himself, but he didn't know where he was, and I could hear the traffic. Because I just woke up, I wasn't thinking, and I said, since you don't know where you are, call me back when you find the intersection where you are so I can come get you. Well, that wasn't a good idea because he had just gotten the phone that day. The volume was not up, and he didn't call me back. And when I called him back, he didn't hear it ring. Eventually, he did call me back, and I called my brother, and my brother tried to call him. Between the two of us, we were able to get him, figure out where he was, bring him home. But that began that whole wandering thing. David was in such good health. He loved to walk, and he was very healthy and enjoyed the outdoors. So that kept him physically healthy. But as his brain was not functioning very well, he became more anxious. And because he didn't know who I was, he'd walk out of the house to get away from the crazy woman. That's what he would come back and tell me later. There's this crazy woman in the house. I don't know who she is. And he would leave. Or he would say, there's this crazy woman, she's been following me. And he would try to get away from me, and I would drive and follow behind him. And you laugh, and it is funny when you think about it. That's another thing you have to do on this journey. You have to laugh, because some of the stuff is just hilarious. So when I tell back the story, it's funny, but of course in the moment it's not funny. And so that's one of the challenges. The shock of as I said, of not being recognized and him not knowing who I was caused him to sometimes lock himself in the bedroom. And he'd call me from the phone, and he'd say, I'm here in the bedroom. And I'd say, okay, I'm out in the kitchen. And he'd say, oh, that's you? Yeah, that's me, and it's okay. Like, it would take him a few minutes to pull it back together and figure out what was going on, and he would sometimes apologize to me because he felt really bad. Because he knew something was wrong, and he couldn't figure it out, and he couldn't fix it. The other thing that was challenging, he would think I was in relationships with other men. If I had somebody come to the house to fix the dishwasher, and I'm having conversation with them, he would get sometimes angry, sometimes he'd walk out the room, or sometimes he'd just ask me, are you and him together? And I'd say, no, you're my husband, and I love you. And I'd give him a smile, and I'd always reassure him, no, it's, honey, you're my husband. And there were times when he'd forget we were married, and I'd say, and he'd ask me, are you planning to marry Michael? I was like, no, David, you're my husband. He said, we're married? And he got so excited. Like, all right, I like this, you know? So I had to learn to remember that he's not understanding everything, and just be patient and go with the flow sometimes. What helped me through this experience was the support and wisdom from people who knew more about what was going on with this disease than I did. As I mentioned, my manager shared with me, and I listened when other people would share their experiences. Support from family and friends was critical. When we realized I needed to find adult day health, my sister and sister-in-law came up from Portland, and they spent a couple of days with me. They went with me to go look out at different agencies, and my sister had managed an assisted living facility, and so she said, Daphne, you need to put away all sharp objects out of the house. I put away all the knives, hid the scissors, and so family around was really important. When David had his heart attack, my siblings came up right away. They made arrangements and were up in Seattle within hours to be with us. So support from family is crucial. Men from the church were supportive to us. David was in a men's accountability group, so I could call on those men when he went walking, and often did, and they would come meet me wherever we were and talk with him and get him to come back home or to come back to me. I prepared a little attachment to a document rather, when the men would offer to take David out and just spend some time with him. I prepared a document that gave them a little history about who David was, because some of these were relatively new friends, and I told them things that he likes. If you take him out to eat, this is what he likes to eat. These are places he likes to go, by the lake, and different things, so that they would know and they could better be a companion to him while they were out. That support was crucial to give me a break. And I mentioned I got support from all kind of agencies and organizations. I would go to monthly Alzheimer support groups. I went to community centers. I went to take the class on powerful tools. I didn't even always know the name of the agency who was offering a service to me. I would go to events like this, and I'd sign up for things, and people would call, and I would get hooked up, and the Evergreen Hospital person came to my house 6 separate times, and they were wonderful. These people were wonderful because they had so much information, and it helped me. I availed myself of everything I could find to help me. Support groups. I went to 5 or 6 different support groups till I found 2 that worked for me. My faith in Jesus is what helped keep me going, because I'm a believer, and I know that spiritual part of me is important. I have to pay attention to it. I stayed connected to people and did things that brought me joy as much as I could, but it's hard to do that when you're in the middle of the caregiving. Think positively. We used to sing a song, Count Your Many Blessings, name them one by one. It helps if you think positively. Some of the other things that helped were self-care. A lot was said about that today. I learned to share my feelings, give myself grace when I got upset, because one time I yelled at David. I never yelled at David. But it just showed how far along in the process I was of feeling the stress. I learned to swallow my pride, ask for help. I learned to breathe. Take a deep breath, relax. You can think a little more clearly. Go to my doctor, go to the mental health professional, exercise, improve my eating, find ways to bring more joy, allow myself to grieve. My relationship with David was strong to begin with, so it helped that we could talk things through, and I was honest with him in talking about things. Humor, as I said, was really important. I journaled a lot, and I have a little reading from one of my journals. I wrote, I just helped David get ready for bed, which is something I've decided in the last few weeks I need to do in order to increase chances that teeth get brushed, PJs get put on, and meds are taken. So while he's taking off his shirt, we're talking, having light conversation, when he says, "You know how to do some things." And I remark, "I got skills." And then he continues to laugh, and he continues undressing, and then he quips, "Yeah, you got skills. I don't know where they are." It's like, where did that come from? So we just had a good laugh around that. Another day, I was feeling down. I went to the Alzheimer's Connect site and just read up on some things, and there was a link to a video that was funny called the Geriatric Traffic Jam. Look that one up on YouTube. That was hilarious. I had to laugh out loud with that. There are many precious moments with this disease that happen, and it's important to know that even though it is hard and it's challenging, to appreciate those moments and hold them close. And if you can journal and write it down, it's nice to read later on as well. The other thing about the wandering I wanted to say, placement was difficult to find a place for him. I first tried to sign him up in an adult family home. He was there for 2 weeks. It was not a good match. I knew he needed more care. They did not have a locked facility, which none of them have. And so I had switched him over to Providence Elder Place to actually help me find a facility. And so they said, okay, let's look for a nursing facility with a locked unit. But they helped me. They did the phone calling for me, and they knew a lot of the facilities, so that helped me weed out the ones that were not going to be good facilities. But eventually, I placed him in Krista. It's in Shoreline. It's far away, but he gets great care. They had a locked facility. They care about him. I love that he's there. I can rest and know that he's being well taken care of, even though it's a challenge to drive that distance. And I take the access bus sometimes, too, when I don't want to drive. And I don't know if my time is actually up. My time is actually up. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Connie Bowen, and most people want to put a R in it. When you see it, it's B-O-W-N, so everybody actually sees it as Brown, but it's Bowen. And I'd like to kind of tell you our story. My husband is also named David, and our Davids got to know one another and spent time together. David and I have known each other since I was in junior high school. And our paths crossed throughout the years intermittently, and we'd always run into each other. We married and to different people. And finally, our paths crossed at a dear friend's funeral. As we were coming out of the funeral, he asked me if he could have my number, so he'd like to call me and we could go out sometime. And as a single person, you give out your number sometimes and you say, oh, well, if they call, good. If they don't, it's all right too. And so, but he did call, and we decided we'd go out to brunch, because if it didn't work out, then we didn't have to be with each other for very long. But he picked me up about 11:30, and we went down to the waterfront and had brunch, and he brought me home around 11:30 that night. So it worked. And so from that point on, we became inseparable almost. And I ran a small business for about 27 years. We did construction for flooring, carpeting, tile, all of that kind of stuff. And so being that I was my own boss, he called me one day and said, I'd like to take you out, take you someplace special. And I said, okay. He said, but you're going to need some time. And we wound up at the border in Vancouver, British Columbia for lunch. And then we came back, and he gave me a dozen roses because it was for Valentine's Day. And so David was such a sweetie, and he was a man of words. And he could put things together and make you feel like the Queen of Sheba or whatever, you know, and just make you feel so good. So when our decline started to happen, to not be able to hear him express himself to the degree that I was accustomed to became very, very disheartening for me. And it started about that we began to notice certain things about 2010. David had retired and had gone back to work as a Metro King County transit operator. And that was the money, he said, this was our money to take our vacations. Every year we went to the Caribbean and spent time in the Caribbean. And that was the money that he made so that we could do all these special things. And as a bus driver, you know, that's very critical. He's driving one of those, what do you call it, the long, really long buses. Yeah, the articulated buses, yes. And so one day he said, on a Saturday, I think I'm going to go drive my route. He worked Monday through Friday, and he was part-time. And I said, okay, I'll go with you. I'd like to see, you know, your route. And he said, oh, that'll be good, come on. So we rode the route, and everything was fine. And the next week he said, I think I'm gonna go and drive my route. And I said, okay, I'll go with you. And he said, well, you know, I missed a stop, and the lady on the bus had to tell me that I missed her stop. And I said, oh, okay. So we drove, and other little things started to happen where he would forget. And then I feel that we were blessed in a sense because he had a problem with his eye, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor said we needed to do some things to do additional testing to see. And we were lucky that the doctor says, we need to do, after all the testing, we need to operate on Dave's eye. And I said, okay. And he said, okay. And he said about 5% of the people, this particular procedure will not work for. We did the procedure. It didn't take. We did the procedure again later, and it didn't take. So I said, no more surgeries. The blessing was that was the way that God worked to stop David from driving a bus. Which was, to me, that was a blessing, and that was the way he said, okay, we'll handle this one this way. And then he was diagnosed with, of course, mild cognitive impairment. And so, but Dave was really quite bright, and so he knew how to finagle his doctor. He knew how to talk. He knew what to say that the doctors say, but you know, they said, oh yeah, well, he's just doing okay. I said, no, he's not. And so they wouldn't let me go to the doctor with him until 2011, I think. And he finally said, I'm gonna I said, can I go to the doctor with you? And he said, okay. And I went and I saw how they were just, the BSing going on, and they were just having such a great time. And I said, well, when do we get around to talking about what's going on? Never. So the next time I said, okay, he's not gonna like me because I've got to ask some questions here and begin this process of finding out what is actually going on. So eventually the doctor told me that before we got there, David could do those tests just like nothing, you know, was wrong. He passed those tests so good, even some of them challenged me, and I didn't have a problem, I didn't think, but, you know, so therefore, but he just did them so well. And the doctors would say, oh, great, great, great. The test that they gave to determine whether or not you may or may not have some type of dementia. David was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, which there's Alzheimer's, what's the other one? Vascular. Alzheimer's, vascular's in the back of the head. Lewy body normally happens with some of the veins here in the arteries here on the side of the head, and where the plaque will develop and the Lewy bodies. And so normally your lifespan after being diagnosed is from 5 to 7 years. David's brother also had Lewy body many years ago before they knew anything, and so they still don't know a lot about Lewy body, but they're working on it. a typical day for me would be like getting David up, helping him, and helping him decide on his clothing and getting him dressed. And I was fortunate enough to get in the VA system with David because David was a serviceman. And so they paid for him to go to Full Life, and that's where he met David Jones. So 3 days a week, David went to Full Life, and for 4 hours he was there at Full Life, which gave me a little bit of time to grocery shop or pay the bills or whatever I needed to do while he was gone. The things started turning really bad for us is when he developed, his wandering was at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. David would get up and my senses, you know, so I couldn't fully sleep most of the time because I was always on to make sure that if he got up, I was awake. And so he would get up and he was fast. And he'd be out the door and he's gone, and before I could get my robe on and get in the car to go find him, he was gone and I couldn't find him. And I'd drive around, and so numerous times I had to call the police to help me because he's wandering in the nighttime, in the dark, and only God knows where he went. But he always found his way back. He would walk for miles, but he would always find his way back. I never knew how that happened, but he did. And by the time the police would find him, he was on his way back to the house. So we put the chimes on the door so that if the door opened, I would know it, because it would go very loud, boop, boop. And so one day, I heard the door open and it rang, boop, boop. And I jumped up and I went to the top of the stairs, and there he was looking at me, and he said, boop, boop. He had a sense of humor too. With Lewy body, you don't necessarily not recognize your loved one. So he always recognized me. He always knew who I was and whatnot. He realized that he was having a problem, and he told me, he said, I'm having trouble with my numbers, and so could you start handling my checkbook? Because he had a checking account, I had a checking account, and then we had the household account. And so I did. And he also had a car, which he wouldn't let me sit on or drive until the doctor told him, this was another blessing. The doctor told him, he said, you should not drive. And David took that to heart. And the day the doctor told him that, he drove us to the doctor, but he let me drive us home. And he never got behind the car again. So he was, it was rare because he accepted the doctors and what they were telling him that he needed to do. He didn't fight me on that. He fought me on a lot of other things that, you know, that taking the medicine and all of those. David came from a family, there were 6 of them. 5 of the 6 had some form of dementia. David and his brother both had Lewy body, and a lot of you know Millie Russell, that's David's sister. She has Alzheimer's, and the older sister had Alzheimer's, and I believe the one that's still, there's Millie and Augie is still living, and she has Alzheimer's. So and Patty died before they diagnosed her with any of the dementias. So, but we know 5 of the 6 had dementia or of some form. So it ran in their family, but without anybody knowing that. As with Daphne, I learned a lot in a short period of time to try and get on top of what was going on and how I was to try to deal with it. Going to a support group, and I went to support group for Lewy body. And so I was able to learn so much from people who were dealing with the disease at the time. The other thing is, I was blessed again. Gloria Roberts and I go to the same church. And we had a mutual friend who said, you two need to get together because you're going through the same journey. And so Gloria and I got together, and then Gloria got Daphne, and the three of us got together as a support group, informal, with each other. Gloria's journey was longer than mine. Daphne's was a little longer than mine. And so I was able to learn from the two who had gotten information along the way and helped me. Gloria pointed me in directions and where I was able to get all kinds of stuff, especially getting into the VA system. And that was a lifesaver also, because we eventually moved him from group health to the VA system. In the end, my husband died a little over 2 years ago. 5 years was his journey. We know it was longer than that, but since after the diagnosis, it was 5 years, because things were happening along the way that you didn't know that that's what was happening until after the fact. And so I just want to say that getting the resources that can help you is so important. There was a book that saved me also. It's called The Guide to Lewy Body Dementia. It was so powerful, and it told me, and in his last days, I knew it was his last days because the book showed me those things that I could expect that would happen, and certainly those things happened to him along the way, so I knew that. The VA gave him excellent care. And in trying to find a place, because when he went to the hospital, they said he cannot come home. I took care of David all during his journey. And so then they told me, well, no, he cannot come home. You cannot take care of him because you can't lift him, you can't move him, you can't do any of those things. And so we're going to have to find a place for him. Well, finding a place is very difficult. There's so few, and they're always full, and it's hard when they're in their last days, and so it's very difficult. Plus, it's costly, and you don't know if you'll be able to pay for your loved one and how that'll impact. And if you pay for your loved one, then what happens to you? And so if all the resources you have is going to go towards your loved one, then what about you? And so there's all this thing that happens in this journey that is so difficult and so challenging. But I was lucky that the VA told me that I need not worry, that he could stay in the hospital while we looked for a place. And that was a blessing, because had he been in any other hospital, they would have been trying to get rid of him, get him out of there within days. And he was there for 3 weeks. And unfortunately, his journey ended there in the VA hospital. But I was blessed that he was able to be there and not being put out of a hospital, because we were at Virginia Mason earlier, and they had said, we've got to place him. And then we couldn't place him because Medicare wouldn't approve of certain things, and so, but they said we had to get him out of there. And the lady talked to me about COPES. We didn't qualify for COPES unless they took all of his earnings would have to go to the state. And I said, well, what about me? How would I live? And she said, I don't know. And she said, but this is the reality of it all. And she said, and this was what really tipped it for me. She said, we can get you some food stamps. And I applied. She said, and you would qualify for $16. Can you imagine? $16 a month for food stamps. And I said, no, thank you. So I said, okay, we've got something else to do here, deal with. And that's when I really had to start praying to God and to show me the right way and what to do for David, and because this was so difficult. And we were in not a bad situation financially, but that would mean, would I have to sell my house, sell our house, and in order to provide care for him? And so these are things that hopefully we'll be able to work with our legislators to develop some resources that help people to be able to help their loved ones, so that it doesn't send you, when life is over, to the poorhouse or wherever. One of the things is, I think that I'm feeling the stress of it all now. It's starting to have an impact on me. And I know that, and George, I appreciate you telling us, you got to do X for yourself and you got to do Y. When you're in the moment, it is very difficult to think in terms of, oh, I got to go take a walk. And he's over here saying, I need, or whatever, or and he maybe can't get up, or needs to go to the bathroom, or whatever it is, and you're saying, oh, I need to go take a walk because I need to rest my, get ready for this. You just can't. So you're on 24/7. Your life is about that person 24/7. And even with help, it's still 24/7. And the stress of it all, I think, is showing up now. For the first time ever, my blood pressure numbers went up. And he's been deceased for over 2 years. But I'm starting to feel the going down and relaxing or whatever. But the stress is starting to have an impact on me, that I can say, oh, I can probably breathe now, where I couldn't before. I know it's important to take care of myself. I'm trying to do that, but it's still difficult. It's still difficult now. And I'm blessed to have friends like Gloria and Daphne, and my son and grandson came and helped me and took care of him to relieve me. And so it's just been a blessing to have all the people around you, but still, in the end, it's all about them and you. Thank you for the opportunity to let me share.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk about how not to do it. And I'll explain that. As you heard, I'm a social worker, born to be a social worker, I'm convinced, and was very involved in social work at the VA, and the last 15 years in the VA, I was the director of social work, and so was busy and born caregiver and born person who tries to be superwoman. So I'm going to tell you a little story about that. tell you a little bit about my mom and I. My mom lived to be about 90 and a half years old, and it was only probably the last 4 years of her life that she started to have dementia, probably Alzheimer's, and some difficulty that progressed over time. But our journey began. I'm one of 6 children. My mom was a single parent by circumstances, not by design. My dad left early on, and she was very independent, and she took care of us, and we survived. And when I was a precocious little kid, I used to promise her when I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to make sure that you don't have to worry about anything. And so I kept that promise. She came to live with me initially when she was probably about 56, 57, for financial reasons. She was in Louisiana, I was in Michigan, and I was trying to help her from afar, and then suggested that she just come live with me. So we lived together for a long time. She was independent. She worked after she came to live with me. She'd gotten laid off from her career job, but when she came to live with me, she worked as a nanny for people and that kind of thing. And she did okay for a long, long time. We had an incredible journey, incredible relationship. All the time I was working in the VA system, and she was involved in my life. So fast forward, like I said, the last 4 or 5 years, she started to have difficulty. And being a super social worker, I knew all the right things to do. I knew the resources. I knew how to get those resources. And I did it in stages. I worked full-time, probably 24/7, to tell you the truth. And I would have caregivers come in during the day while I was at work to sit with her and to make sure. She had some chronic physical problems that started to give her trouble, and I knew things were going on. When my mother was an excellent cook. She loved to cook, and one day when she told me she was afraid to be near the stove, I knew something was going on. I knew something must have happened, and I started to figure out, well, she's having a little difficulty. So I would have people stay with her during the day while I was at work, and then I would make sure she was okay after that. And so that lasted for a long time, for probably 2 or 3 years of the time that we were able to do that pretty successfully. She resisted caregivers initially, but I said, if you want to stay with me, this is the way it's got to be. I got to know that you're safe and that you're okay. So she said, okay. So, but then things started to deteriorate, and she was having trouble sleeping at night. She was sundowning, and she was wanting to go out and check her mail at midnight. I got to go out. The mail just ran. I got to go out. And so, super social worker, super daughter, decided that because she wasn't sleeping, I couldn't sleep, and I got a recliner in her bedroom, and I would just kind of sit up and be on watch to make sure she was not getting out of the house. And, you know, I did some things like Connie and Daphne in terms of securing the door and that kind of thing. But she was still, you know, getting up, and so Taylene wasn't sleeping. And this went on for quite a few months. And remember, I'm working full-time, 24/7 at the VA, and coming home and I'm not sleeping. And so luckily for me, she, because of some chronic medical problems, she was getting some home hospice, some care for some of the medical problems. And the nurses involved in the program were the one who helped do the intervention. The social workers, I think, were afraid to deal with me, you know. They knew who I was and, you know, all of that. So, but it was the nurses who kind of helped save the day. So they said to me, well, Ms. Watson, you know you're eligible for some respite through hospice, and your mom can go into the hospital for a week. And why don't you think about doing that, you know? We think you need a break, and let us do that. So reluctantly, I conceded, you know, and then once she was in the hospital, one of them called me and said, you know, now that she's in the hospital, now meanwhile, I'm the one who wrote the book about caregiving. I used to coordinate caregiver programs at the VA. And so, you know, I should have known better. But when it's you, it's different. When it's your loved one, and especially someone who you were as connected to as I was my mom. And so nurse called and said, well, you know, now that your mom's in the hospital, maybe you would consider letting her go to a facility, because we don't think you could ever do it from home. So think about that, think about that. And meanwhile, because I had not been sleeping, I developed these blisters on my legs. It's called status venatitis or something like that for you. If your body needs to lie down and you need to rest within a 24-hour period, or you get these. And so I had gone to the doctor, and my doctor said, so how long have you had these? And I minimized it. I said, oh, for a little while. And she said, you're lying. What's going on with your mom? So I kind of told her, and this was the time that my mom was in the hospital, and she said, you know, you're going to have to do something, or I'm going to have to hospitalize you. So she threatened me, right? So I said to the nurses, okay, let's think about placement. I called the social worker, and she said, well, Ms. Watson, I don't think I can find a placement that quickly. It was like within the 7-day period. So I said, well, that's okay, I'll do it. And I did. So I started to make some calls. I know the resources, you know, I wrote the book, remember? And I found a place near the hospital because I felt I could visit her after work and be near her. And it was a good place. It had a good reputation. And so I conceded to let her go to the facility the day she was going to be discharged from the respite in the hospital. Met her there, and she was there. She was glad to see me, and when she saw me, she grabbed her purse and said, oh, you've come to, you know, she was wondering why she was there, and we're going home. And I said, no, you're going to be staying here. And she, all of a sudden, she's lucid, completely. How can you do this to me? You said you, and she's right, you promised me I'd always be with you. Never make that promise. It's a promise you cannot keep. I made it, and I tried to keep it, as you can tell. And so she's upset. I'm crying. You know, she said, well, I have a friend named Phyllis. She said, well, call Phyllis. If you don't want me, she'll have me. You know, and so I'm like, oh my God, right? You know. And again, the nurses are great. I have of the utmost respect for nurses. They grabbed her and they said, good night, Miss Watson. Go. We'll see you later. So I left the facility and I'm just wasted, right? I drove around for probably about an hour thinking she's right. I just need to go back and get her. I can do it. I can quit my job. I can, you know, I'm just talking to myself. But luckily, I didn't go back, you know, and I went home. So she was in a facility for probably about the last 13 months of her life. But every time I would go to visit, when I got ready to leave, she would grab the purse and say, I'm coming, you know. And so she survived, I survived, and I would take her out of the facility on passes, but I was afraid to take her home, so I would take her to a motel. And that's how I adjusted to being able to have her with me. I was afraid if I took her home, I would never get her out of the house again, and I probably wouldn't have. So we survived that journey. She got excellent care, but the committee and I were talking, the planning committee, and we thought it'd be nice for me to share that story with you because, like I said, I know about caregiving, I know about resources, I wrote the book, but you can see what happens when it's your loved one and you're not just making good decisions and you're not taking care of yourself. When she was with me, I would do most of her care, even with the caregivers. I would get up and give her a bath every morning before I get myself off to work, you know, even though I had paid caregivers in the home. And I was determined that I was the one who was going to take care of her. That wasn't very reasonable or responsible, but it's what's happened when you're in a relationship, a loving relationship, and you're trying to make sure your loved one gets the best of care. So rule number one is, you know, ask for help, take help, use resources, don't try to go it alone, you know. I succeeded for a while, but you can tell it almost took the best out of me. So I thought it would be helpful to just share that with you as the prototype of what not to do. So, thank you.
We're going to have Q&A now for about 15 minutes. And so, do you have questions?
While you're doing that, I'd like to share something else. George, you mentioned about research. I agreed to have David become a part of the research at VA and with the University of Washington. So when he passed, they did the autopsy on his brain and were able to use that. And so few African Americans do that and let their loved one become a part of a research project. And I did, and I'm very pleased. My only thing was, would it interfere with his looks at the funeral? And so nobody knew. Yes.
So I have a question. Thank you so much, panel. Having been a caregiver myself for many years, I experienced, I think, the most challenging time when it was this is still really hard. It's still so raw, even though it was a few years ago. But I wanted to ask you, what was your most challenging time during this caregiving journey? And I'm just asking that if I can preface it by saying, I know for me the most challenging time was when I had to let go of my responsibility of taking care of my husband and place him. Because the guilt around that was so heavy, and I still have some of that.
And I certainly agree that for me, that was the most difficult part for me, is letting go and realizing that I could not continue on the path I was headed and survive, and I couldn't keep my mom safe. And so I think that is a hard part of the caregiving journey, is, you know, when you let go, when do you decide that you are not the one who's going to give all of the care. And I've seen caregivers struggle with that, and I've helped other caregivers sort that out and facilitate some things. But when it's your loved one, you're not being rational about it. You're not thinking clearly, and you make some mistakes. So for me, that was the hardest part of my journey.
I never got to that point, but I was preparing the home for him to return and for me to be able to take care of him, and that was impossible to do because they wouldn't let me do that. But the thing is that if that was my only alternative, I was going to take care of him. But letting him go someplace other than with you is very, very difficult.
I would say for me the most difficult part was the last year before I placed him, because he was wandering so often. It got to where it was almost a daily occurrence. He's going to walk out the door and I'm going to get in the car and follow him and try to track him. When he got down to Rainier Avenue, that was bad. That was 1.5 miles or 2 from my house. It's hard to follow on Rainier Avenue. That was not good. But because he was still so physically able, I mean, at that point he was in his, like 62 maybe, he was still very healthy and walking around. I didn't have to help him with dressing. He still could do a lot of that. So I wasn't really thinking as much about placing him as someone else might, but the issue became he's not safe. And I took him down one time to the marina in Des Moines for an event, and he got away from me and I couldn't find him. And then it's starting to get dark and the police are out looking for him and I can't find him. And when that whole ordeal was over, my daughter said, "Mom, I think you need to place him because he's just not safe." And so the safety issue was what made me decide it's time to place him. And that's why it's helpful to have people around you. You gotta listen to them because they're watching you with different eyes than you can see from your own vantage point.